The glass slipped before anyone could stop it. Just a breath of time, just a small mistake. But when crystal touched marble, the sound cut through the room like a blade. Sharp, unforgiving, louder than the piano floating from the corner, louder than the soft laughter of people who had never worried about the price of a mistake. Every conversation died at once. Heads turned, shoulders stiffened. And the black waitress froze, caught mid-step, her fingers still open as red wine spilled across the white floor and rolled slowly toward the polished shoes of the man at the center of the room. The millionaire didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look down at first. He simply leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't surprised or amused. It was measured, controlled. The kind of smile that comes from knowing the room belongs to you, from knowing everyone was watching. When he finally looked at the floor, then back up at her, his eyes didn't show anger. They showed opportunity. "Well," he said softly. Soft enough that only the closest tables heard. At first. The waitress felt her heart pounding against her ribs as if it wanted out. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. She could smell the wine. She could feel the heat of hundreds of eyes pressing against her skin. She had worked rooms like this before, rooms filled with money and power and fragile egos. She knew the rules. Keep your head down, apologize fast, disappear faster. "I'm so sorry, sir," she finally said, her voice barely steady. "It was an accident." The millionaire raised a finger, silencing her. He leaned forward slightly, letting the pause stretch. People leaned in too. He lifted his voice just a little more this time. "Sorry," he repeated. "Is that what you call this?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the nearest tables. The waitress felt her cheeks burn, but she stayed standing. Her hands trembled, but she didn't wipe them on her apron. She didn't cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears only gave people permission to go further. The millionaire tilted his head. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him. He nodded slowly, as if tasting it. "And where are you from?" he asked. She answered, short, polite. He smiled wider. No, he said. "I mean, where are you really from?" The room grew quieter. Phones began to lift almost without thinking. Moments like this had a way of becoming stories. The waitress swallowed. She answered again. This time, her voice shook. "Interesting," the millionaire said, loud enough now for the entire room to hear. "And is this how things are done where you come from, spilling drinks on guests?" Laughter spread, louder this time, safer laughter, the kind people used when they didn't want to be the next target. The waitress felt her chest tighten. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. She nodded once. "I'm sorry," she said again. The manager rushed over, his face pale, his voice low and sharp as he leaned toward her ear. He whispered about consequences, about pay deductions, about being replaced. His eyes darted to the millionaire, waiting for approval. The millionaire waved him off without looking. No, he said. "Let her stay. This is a teachable moment." He stood now, slowly, deliberately. The room followed him as if pulled by a string. He gestured at the spill, then at her. "This," he said, "is why standards matter. This is why you can't just let anyone work events like this. Some people just aren't built for rooms like this." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. The waitress felt them land on her shoulders, one by one. Years of early mornings, late nights, double shifts stacked on top of each other, smiles practiced in mirrors, apologies memorized like scripts. All of it collapsed into this single moment, reduced to a stain on the floor. She bent down to clean the spill. Her knees touched the cold marble. She reached for the cloth with steady hands, though her insides were shaking. She focused on the wine spreading outward, not on the phones pointed at her, not on the whispers behind manicured hands. She wiped carefully, methodically, as if this were any other shift, as if dignity could still live in routine. Above her, the millionaire continued talking, about professionalism, about respect, about how hard he'd worked to build what he had. Each word was wrapped in lessons, but every lesson felt like a reminder of her place. She scrubbed until the floor shone again. When she stood, her manager leaned in, whispering that she should apologize again. Properly this time. Publicly. The millionaire crossed his arms, waiting. She looked at him, just for a second, long enough to remind herself she was still human. "I'm sorry for the spill," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "It won't happen again." The millionaire raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" he asked. No gratitude, no acknowledgement. The silence stretched. The piano had stopped playing. Even the servers nearby had frozen. The waitress felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She could feel the choice forming. Swallow it or stand. "I'm sorry for the mistake," she repeated. "Not for who I am." A breath moved through the room. Sharp, uncomfortable. The manager's eyes went wide. Someone gasped. The millionaire's smile vanished. He stepped closer now, lowering his voice, but the threat was clear. "Careful," he said. "People like you don't get many chances." The waitress didn't answer. She simply nodded once and turned back toward her station, her back straight, her hands steady, even as her heart raced. She didn't know why she felt calm. Maybe because the worst had already happened. Maybe because something inside her had stopped bending. At the far end of the ballroom, the doors opened quietly. No one noticed at first, not the guests sipping champagne, not the phones still recording, not the millionaire basking in control. An older man stepped inside, dressed simply, his movements unhurried. He paused just inside the doorway and took in the scene. The stain that was no longer there, the tension that still was. His eyes followed the waitress as she walked away. And in that moment, though no one else could feel it yet, the balance in the room shifted. Something unseen began to turn. The laughter that had filled the air moments earlier faded into something brittle, something uncertain. The waitress reached the edge of the room and exhaled, unaware that this was only the beginning. Unaware that the moment meant to shrink her had just placed her at the center of a story much larger than a spilled glass. The doors closed softly behind the man. And everything was about to change. The manager's voice cut low and sharp as he leaned toward her ear, telling her to hurry, telling her people were watching, telling her she was already on thin ice. His breath smelled like coffee and panic. He wasn't angry at the situation. He was afraid of it. Afraid of the man standing only a few feet away, still holding his glass like a trophy. Afraid of what would happen if this moment didn't end fast enough. Around them, guests murmured, soft voices, fake concern. Some shook their heads like this was unfortunate, like this was something sad they had to witness, not something they were quietly enjoying. Others smiled behind their glasses, eyes bright, feeding on the tension. It was entertainment now. A break from polite talk about stocks and vacations. The millionaire continued speaking as if nothing had happened, as if the woman kneeling at his feet wasn't there. He told a story about hard work, about discipline, about how people today wanted shortcuts instead of earning their place. He never once lowered his glass, never once looked down. Each sentence landed clean and sharp, like a slap wrapped in wisdom. The waitress wiped the floor on her knees, the cloth damp with wine, her fingers steady even as her chest felt tight. The marble was cold. The sound of fabric against stone felt loud in the silence. She focused on the motion, back and forth, slow, careful. She told herself this was just another shift, just another moment. She had survived worse. Her mind raced, but not with anger. With math. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Tuition was due before the end of the month. Her mother's medication needed refilling. These were the numbers that mattered. These were the things that kept her standing when pride wanted to rise. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant swallowing humiliation in public so dignity could live somewhere safer, somewhere private. Still, something inside her cracked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, like a hairline fracture spreading through glass. A feeling she couldn't name. A reminder that she was tired, tired of bowing her head, tired of apologizing for space she had earned, tired of being told who belonged and who didn't. When she finished cleaning, she folded the cloth neatly. She stood slowly, aware of how many eyes followed her movement. The manager immediately stepped in front of her, whispering again, this time harsher. He told her to apologize properly, to thank the man, to fix this before it got worse. The millionaire turned toward her, smiling again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm listening." Phones came out openly now. No more pretending. Screens glowed in the dim light. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was content. It was something to share, something to laugh at later. The waitress looked at him, just for a second, long enough to see the confidence, the certainty, the belief that this scene belonged to him. "I'm sorry for the spill," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, not for existing. The room went still. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from respect. It was the kind that comes from surprise, from something unexpected breaking the script. The manager sucked in a breath like he'd been hit. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Someone laughed nervously, then stopped. The millionaire's smile dropped. He leaned forward slowly, setting his glass down for the first time. His voice lowered, but it carried. "Careful," he said. "People like you don't get warnings twice." The words hung heavy in the air, a reminder, a threat, a line drawn where he believed it had always been. The room leaned toward him again. Power always pulls attention back to itself. Guests waited to see what he would do next, how far he would take it. The silence became a weapon, pressing down on the waitress's chest, daring her to move. She didn't speak. She didn't apologize again. She simply stood there, hands at her sides, breathing slow, eyes forward. Her heart pounded, but her face didn't change. Something about her stillness unsettled the room. It wasn't defiance. It was restraint. The manager shifted nervously, glancing between them. He knew this had gone too far. He also knew he couldn't stop it. What no one in that room knew was that the woman standing there wasn't trapped. She wasn't cornered. She wasn't powerless in the way they thought. She was waiting. Waiting the way people learn to wait when they've been underestimated their whole lives. Waiting for the moment when silence stopped protecting the wrong person. At the far end of the ballroom, conversations had started to change. Subtle at first. Heads turned. Whispers passed between tables. A few guests lowered their phones, their expressions shifting from amusement to curiosity. Something in the air felt different, tighter, like the calm before a storm. The older man who had entered earlier stood near the back, unnoticed by most. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. His eyes followed the waitress, then moved to the millionaire, then around the room. He listened to the murmurs. He read the faces. He recognized the pattern. He had seen this kind of power play before. Behind the scenes, connections were already moving. A sponsor leaned toward another, whispering. A donor frowned, shaking his head. Someone quietly stepped away to make a call. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just shifts, small ones, the kind that mattered. The millionaire felt none of it yet. He was still focused on the woman in front of him, still enjoying the weight of the moment. He believed control was still his. The waitress finally turned away, moving back toward her station. Each step felt heavy, but she didn't rush. She didn't look back. She knew the eyes were still on her. She knew the story wasn't over. The laughter that had filled the room earlier didn't return. It hovered, uncertain, brittle. People glanced at one another, unsure how to feel. The piano didn't start again. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. And in that quiet, something shifted. The millionaire stood there, unaware that the room was beginning to look at him differently. Unaware that the attention he had pulled so easily was starting to slip. Unaware that the silence he used as a weapon was about to turn on him. The waitress reached the edge of the room and paused, her back still straight, her hands still steady. She took a breath, not knowing exactly what would happen next, only knowing that the ground beneath this moment was no longer solid. Somewhere behind her, a voice cleared its throat, and the balance of power began to tilt. The doors closed softly behind him, almost politely, like the room itself was unsure whether to acknowledge his arrival. He didn't rush. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't ask for attention. An older man in a simple gray suit stood near the back, hands folded, eyes steady. His shoes weren't flashy. His watch didn't shine. Nothing about him demanded notice. And yet, something shifted the moment he stopped walking. The waitress felt it before she saw him, a tightening in her chest, a pause in her step. She turned her head just enough to look. When their eyes met, her shoulders stiffened, not with fear, with recognition. A quiet, grounding recognition that felt like air after being underwater too long. The millionaire didn't notice any of it. He was still talking, still smiling, still enjoying the sound of his own voice filling the space. He made another joke about service workers who forgot their place. He laughed at his own line. A few people laughed with him, softer this time, less certain. He gestured toward the waitress's empty station and said something about how easily people could be replaced. By morning, he added, like it was a punchline. The older man listened. He watched the waitress. He watched the manager's rigid posture. He watched the way phones were still raised, but hands were starting to shake. He watched the millionaire, who had grown comfortable in the belief that the room belonged to him. Then slowly, the older man raised his hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't high, just enough. The millionaire stopped mid-sentence, annoyed. He frowned, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir," he said, forcing a polite tone, "this is a private event." "She works for me," the older man said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried anyway. Confusion rippled through the room. A few guests turned fully now, trying to place him. The waitress felt her lungs finally fill. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. The millionaire blinked. "I'm sorry," he said. The older man stepped forward. Each step was unhurried. Calm, he didn't look at the millionaire right away. He looked at the waitress first, gave her a small nod, not praise, not pity, just acknowledgement. Then he faced the room. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he said. The name landed like a dropped glass, but this time, no one laughed. The manager's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. Someone near the front whispered, recognizing it now. A donor stiffened. A sponsor's eyes widened. The name wasn't famous in the loud way. It was known in the quiet places, on buildings without plaques, on programs without press releases, hotel chains, investment firms, scholarships that changed lives without ever making headlines. The millionaire's smile faltered. Daniel Whitmore continued speaking, his tone even. "She's a graduate student," he said, nodding toward the waitress. "Top of her class. I sponsor her education. During the day, she manages regional operations for one of my companies. At night, she works here." Murmurs spread. Phones lowered, forgotten. The story everyone thought they were recording suddenly felt incomplete. "She asked me once why I still work the way I do," Daniel said. "Why I still show up early. Why I still serve people myself. I told her it keeps me honest. It keeps me human." He finally turned to the millionaire. "I ask my people to serve," he said, eyes steady, voice firm. "Not to be humiliated." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, absolute. It pressed down on the room until no one dared fill it. The millionaire stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked smaller standing, less certain. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. Words stumbled out, tangled and thin. An apology started, then stopped. He glanced around, looking for support, for laughter, for anything to pull him back to solid ground. There was nothing. The power he had held minutes earlier slipped through his fingers like wine on marble. He could feel it now. The eyes that once leaned toward him had shifted, some with disappointment, some with judgment, some with something close to shame. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult him. He didn't need to. "Moments like this," he said calmly, "tell us who we are and who we're choosing to be." The millionaire swallowed hard. His hands flexed at his sides. He nodded, too quickly, as if agreement might save him. "I didn't know," he said. "I mean, I couldn't have known." Daniel's expression didn't change. "You didn't need to know," he replied. "You just needed to be decent." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. The waitress stood quietly where she was, her back straight, her face calm. She didn't smile. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't enjoy the shift in attention. She simply stood tall, the way she always had, even when no one noticed. Guests avoided the millionaire's eyes now. Some looked at the floor, others at their phones, suddenly busy. The manager wiped his brow, nodding too much, murmuring apologies to anyone who would listen. Daniel turned back to the waitress. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once, that was all. He smiled then, soft, brief. "Good," he said. The millionaire tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. He offered explanations, context, jokes meant to soften the moment. None of them landed. The room had moved on. Whatever version of himself he had been performing no longer had an audience. Daniel placed a hand lightly on the waitress's shoulder. Not possessive, not protective, supportive. The kind that says you're not alone, but you're capable. "We're done here," he said. They turned to leave. As they walked, the room parted without a word. No one stopped them. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence followed them, thick and telling. At the doors, the waitress paused for half a second, not to look back at the millionaire, but to take one last breath in the space that had tried to shrink her. Then she stepped through. Behind them, the doors closed softly again. Inside the ballroom, the millionaire stood frozen, surrounded by people yet completely alone. He stared at the floor where the wine had spilled earlier. Clean now, shining, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. And for the first time that night, he understood that the story was no longer his to control. The apology came out wrong the moment it left his mouth. Too fast, too loud, like he was racing the moment instead of facing it. The millionaire stood there with his hands open, palms out, voice raised just enough to be heard by everyone, as if volume could make sincerity real. He said he was sorry if anyone felt offended, sorry if things were taken the wrong way, sorry that the night had gone sideways. It sounded less like regret and more like a reset button he expected the room to press for him. No one did. The older man listened without interrupting, his face calm, his eyes steady. When the apology ended, he didn't nod. He didn't shake hands. He simply let the silence stretch, long enough for the millionaire to feel it, long enough for the room to understand that some words arrived too late to matter. "That's not an apology," the older man said quietly. "That's fear of consequences." The room stayed silent. No laughter, no murmurs, just the soft hum of lights overhead and the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. The millionaire swallowed and tried again, but this time his voice cracked. The confidence was gone now. What stood in its place was panic. The kind that comes when a man realizes money can't buy him out of the moment he created. Still, it wasn't accepted. People began to move, slowly at first. A sponsor checked his phone and frowned. Another leaned toward his partner and whispered. Someone slipped out the side door without saying goodbye. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Power rarely collapses in a single moment. It erodes, quietly, publicly, permanently. By the end of the night, it was already starting. Clips didn't spread because of the spilled wine. They spread because of the smile, the words, the tone, the way he looked at another human being and decided she was smaller. By morning, those clips were everywhere, not edited, not softened, just clear enough to let the truth speak for itself. The millionaire woke up to messages that didn't ask how he was doing. They asked what happened. Then they stopped asking. Invitations disappeared without explanation. Meetings were postponed, then canceled. Sponsors released careful statements about values and alignment. The kind of language that sounds polite but closes doors forever. His reputation didn't shatter in one loud break. It cracked again and again under the weight of his own words. Before leaving the ballroom that night, the older man turned to the waitress. She stood near the exit, hands folded, eyes steady. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired, relieved, grounded. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head slightly, instinctively. "I didn't." He raised a hand gently. "Not for staying quiet," he said, "for staying dignified." That landed deeper than any praise. He reminded her, softly, that character shows itself most clearly when power is uneven. When someone has every reason to shrink and chooses not to. When someone stands in silence and lets truth speak later. She nodded, feeling something loosen in her chest. The manager found her before she left. His face was red, his eyes wet. He apologized in a rush, words tumbling over each other. He said he should have stopped it, that he was scared, that he'd failed her. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and for once they weren't performative. She listened. She believed him. She forgave him. But she didn't stay. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the same place that taught her how easy it was to be humiliated. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing herself anyway. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, the videos slowed. Life kept moving the way it always does, quietly, forward. The waitress finished her semester strong. She turned in her resignation without drama. No speeches, no confrontations, just a letter, neatly folded, thanking the company for the opportunity. She stepped into a leadership role elsewhere. Somewhere her voice mattered before mistakes were made. Somewhere respect wasn't conditional. Somewhere her worth wasn't tied to how perfectly she served someone else's comfort. She walked into her new office on the first day and sat down at a desk that belonged to her. The chair didn't wobble. The door closed when she needed it to. The window let in light. She took a breath and smiled just a little, not because she had won, but because she had chosen peace. As for the millionaire, his lesson arrived slowly. It came in the form of unanswered emails, of rooms that felt colder than they used to, of introductions that no longer carried weight. He still had money, still had homes, still had things, but something had shifted, something he couldn't buy back. He began to understand that status doesn't come from who you can embarrass. It comes from who you choose to uplift. That rooms don't make people superior. Choices do. That power doesn't reveal itself in control, but in restraint. No one applauded his growth. No one needed to. The lesson wasn't for them. And long after the wine stain faded from the marble floor, after the gala became just another date on a calendar, the truth of that night lingered. Because how you treat someone who can do nothing for you reveals everything about who you truly are.